Judge Malcolm Reed pushed open the front door with the same careful restraint he used in his courtroom. But the house greeted him with a stillness that felt heavier than usual. The lamps were on, their soft glow stretching across the hardwood floors, yet nothing in the room felt warm. Elena had once filled the evenings with small noises, pans clinking, music humming faintly from the kitchen, her footsteps tracing familiar paths. Now the house seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for someone who no longer bothered to arrive. He set his briefcase down and listened. No movement upstairs, no greeting, only the faint ticking of the clock above the fireplace. He loosened his tie and walked toward the dining room, hoping she might appear in the doorway with a tired smile. Instead, he found a glass of wine half finished on the table, the lipstick imprint still fresh. She wasn't gone long, he told himself. She was probably in the garden or on a call with her sister. Yet the wine, untouched for what looked like hours, told a different story. "Elena?" His voice drifted through the hallway, steady but strained. Silence answered. He took a slow breath and moved toward the living room window. Outside, the yard sat in its usual quiet order, hedges trimmed, patio lights flickering on with the dusk. But something about it felt wrong, as if the scene belonged to a life he no longer recognized. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to shake off the unease. He had felt it for months, a soft, constant shift in Elena, like she had turned inward and locked the door behind her. When the front latch clicked, he turned. Elena stepped inside with a careful smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're home early?" "Not really," he replied, watching her set down her purse. "I didn't hear you in the house." "I went for a walk," she said quickly. "Needed air." He nodded, though he didn't believe it. Her walks had become excuses, little escapes that carried a scent of secrecy. Before he could ask more, another sound broke the thin calm. A car door shutting outside. Elena froze. Malcolm stepped toward the window, just as the porch light revealed a figure climbing the steps. Jacob. Their son stood taller, older, and worn by something Malcolm couldn't identify. His duffel bag hung from one shoulder, his expression unreadable. Malcolm opened the door. "You're back," he said, trying to hide the jolt of surprise. Jacob gave a stiff nod. "Didn't know where else to go." Elena's breath hitched, barely audible. Malcolm glanced at her, sensing a tension sharp enough to slice through the room. "Well," Malcolm said quietly, "you're home now." But the way Jacob stepped inside, avoiding both their eyes, told Malcolm the house was no longer merely silent. It was holding a secret, and whatever it was, it had already begun to change the air they breathed. Malcolm felt the first crack forming inside him, faint but impossible to ignore now. Jacob's footsteps echoed lightly against the hallway floor, a rhythm Malcolm hadn't heard in years. The house seemed to shift with his presence, as if remembering a weight it had once carried. Malcolm closed the door behind him and studied his son quietly. Jacob kept his eyes low, shoulders tense, the duffel bag swinging slightly as he moved toward the living room. Elena lingered by the staircase, hands clasped together. Her silence pressed against the space between them. Malcolm waited for her to speak, to offer even a simple question. "When did you arrive? How long are you staying?" But she said nothing. Instead, she watched Jacob with a mix of caution and something else Malcolm couldn't yet name. "I would have picked you up from the station," Malcolm said, trying to fill the void. "It was fine." Jacob dropped the bag by the couch. "Didn't want to bother anyone." The distance in his tone stung more than Malcolm expected. He forced a quiet nod and stepped into the kitchen, motioning Jacob to follow. Elena stayed behind, as if rooted to the floor. Malcolm opened a cabinet, reached for glasses, and poured water instead of the wine he suddenly craved. How long are you planning to stay? Jacob shrugged. A while, I guess. I needed space. Things weren't working out. Malcolm studied him more closely. His son's once bright eyes were dimmer now, shadowed with exhaustion. From what? Everything, Jacob muttered, taking the glass. He stared at the water as if it held answers. Life's been complicated. Malcolm waited for more, but Jacob didn't continue. The silence stretched again, thick and unwelcoming. When Jacob finally looked up, Malcolm saw a flicker of resentment hidden behind the tired exterior. Something unspoken, something old. From the doorway, Elena's voice broke the tension. Jacob, are you hungry? Her tone was soft, too soft, warm in a way Malcolm hadn't heard in months. Jacob turned to her, and for the first time since arriving, his expression shifted. Relief washed over him, fragile but real. Elena offered a small smile that tightened Malcolm's chest. He had expected distance, awkwardness, maybe even anger between them. Instead, the air vibrated with a strange familiarity that made Malcolm's pulse quicken. I could eat, Jacob said. Elena stepped closer, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'll make something quick.
You don't have to, Malcolm interjected.
It's fine, she said without looking at him. Jacob followed her toward the kitchen, the two moving with an ease Malcolm couldn't understand. He watched them quietly. Elena opening cupboards with practiced movements, Jacob leaning against the counter, their bodies angled toward each other as if they'd shared moments Malcolm had never witnessed. A cold weight settled in his stomach. Something about their closeness felt off, wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was simply the discomfort of their fractured family coming together again. But the feeling clung to him. Later that night, after Elena had gone upstairs and Jacob retreated to the guest room, Malcolm stood alone in the hallway. A faint murmur seeped from behind Elena's closed door, her voice low and strained, as if pleading with someone. When he leaned closer, the murmuring stopped abruptly, leaving the house in a suffocating stillness. Malcolm stared at the door, the unease from earlier settling deeper into his bones. Something was shifting in this house, and whatever Jacob had brought with him, it wasn't just baggage. It was a shadow that seemed to come from behind that door. A shadow Malcolm would soon see for himself. The morning after Jacob's return, Malcolm woke to an unfamiliar heaviness in the air, as if the house itself had spent the night whispering things he couldn't quite hear. He dressed quietly, hoping the routine would steady him, but every motion felt slow, reluctant. When he stepped into the hallway, he paused outside Elena's door. It remained shut, the thin line of light beneath it flickering faintly. He stood there longer than he meant to. Downstairs, he heard soft voices, Elena and Jacob. Their tones were low, almost intimate, as if they shared a conversation meant to stay in shadows. Malcolm descended the stairs slowly, careful not to disturb anything. When he reached the living room, they fell silent instantly. Elena busied herself with the fruit bowl. Jacob reached for his coffee. Malcolm nodded stiffly. Morning. Jacob muttered something in return. Elena didn't look at Malcolm at all. Throughout breakfast, every gesture they made, every glance, every breath, pressed against Malcolm's chest like something intentionally hidden. Elena passed Jacob the butter with a small smile. Jacob brushed her fingers accidentally. Or perhaps not. Malcolm's hands tightened around his cup until his knuckles turned white. He left earlier than usual, unable to stay in the house without feeling swallowed by suspicion. All day in court, Malcolm struggled to focus. His robe felt heavier. Each case seemed to drag. He kept seeing Elena's soft smile directed at Jacob, the one she hadn't given Malcolm in years. When he returned home that evening, the feeling worsened. Jacob's shoes were in the hallway. Elena's scarf, one she rarely wore, lay draped over the couch. The wine bottle from last night had been replaced with a new one, only slightly empty. Malcolm's throat tightened. He moved upstairs, telling himself he was being irrational, that families changed shape, that maybe this was simply a difficult reunion. But then he heard the muffled sound, Elena's voice, and Jacob's. Soft, too soft. Malcolm froze halfway up the stairs. His hand tightened on the railing as the voices drifted from the master bedroom. His bedroom. His breath halted. A quiet laugh from Elena, one he hadn't heard in months. A low murmur from Jacob that made Malcolm's skin crawl. Every instinct told him to retreat, to pretend he hadn't heard anything, to swallow the growing dread and handle it rationally. He tried to tell himself he misunderstood, that they were joking, talking, reconciling as mother and son. But no mother laughed like that. Not like that. Malcolm took another step. The floor creaked beneath him, and the laughter stopped instantly. Silence rushed into the hallway, thick and suffocating. He reached the door and lifted his hand, hesitating for the briefest moment. His heartbeat crashed like a drum against his ribs. He opened the door. The room's dim light spilled over Elena and Jacob. Too close, far too close. Jacob was standing behind her, his hands near her shoulders, their bodies angled in a way that made Malcolm's vision blur. They jerked away from each other as if scalded, but the guilt in their faces was unmistakable. Elena's voice broke first. "Malcolm, this isn't—" Jacob stepped forward. "Dad, just listen." But Malcolm couldn't hear them. The blood rushed in his ears, drowning out their excuses. His gaze moved between them, between the bed, the scattered pillows, the flushed colour on Elena's face. His stomach twisted violently. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was betrayal. Raw, intimate, unforgivable. Elena reached out with trembling fingers. "Please, don't jump to conclusions." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Dad, we can explain." Malcolm took a single step back, the weight of the scene crashing over him like a wave. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He could barely stand. He looked at them, his wife and his son, and felt the foundation of his entire life tilt beneath his feet. But the worst part wasn't what he saw. It was the feeling that this wasn't the beginning. It was the end he should have seen long ago. And as he backed out of the room, one question consumed him. What would this broken night push him to do next? Malcolm reached the bottom of the staircase with the slow, uneven steps of a man whose world had shifted without warning. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the banister, trying to steady breaths that came too fast, too shallow. The lights in the hallway flickered across framed family photos, birthdays, vacations, smiles that now looked like lies posing as memories. He tore his gaze away before the ache could deepen. Behind him, he heard muffled movement from the bedroom above. The sound made his jaw clench. He walked into the study, closing the door gently, though every part of him wanted to slam it shut. His pulse throbbed in a harsh, frantic rhythm as he dropped into his chair. His mind clawed for logic, for reason, for any explanation other than the one seared into his eyes moments ago. But each attempt collapsed into the same unbearable truth. Elena and Jacob, his wife and his son. He pressed both hands against his forehead, forcing himself to breathe. "It can't be," he whispered to the empty room. "It can't." A soft knock at the study door made him lift his head. "Malcolm, can we talk?" Elena's voice trembled. He didn't answer right away. When the silence stretched, the door opened slowly. Elena stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly together, eyes red as if she had cried, but wiped the evidence away too quickly. "Please," she whispered, "just listen." Malcolm's voice cracked. "To what? To excuses? Lies? Tell me, how long has this been happening?" "It's not what you think," she said, stepping forward. He scoffed. "Then tell me what it is." Elena swallowed hard. "Jacob has been struggling, emotionally. He came to me months ago, before he returned home. He was lost, hurt, ashamed. He needed comfort. I shouldn't have let it get complicated." "Complicated?" Malcolm's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You call that complicated?" Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "You weren't here, Malcolm. Not really. Jacob was breaking. I thought I could help him. I thought I could keep our family together." He stared at her in disbelief. "By destroying it?" Before Elena could speak again, footsteps approached. Jacob appeared at the doorway, face tight with fear and defiance. "Dad, stop," Jacob said. "You're twisting everything." Malcolm rose from his chair slowly. "Am I? Then tell me, what exactly did I see?" Jacob's throat tightened. His voice shook. "I messed up. But she wasn't the only one who failed me. You weren't there, not as a father, not once. Everything always mattered more than me." "That justifies this?" Malcolm snapped. "No," Jacob said, "but it explains why everything fell apart." Elena stepped between them, reaching out a hand. "Please, both of you, just calm down. We can fix this. We can talk about it. We can get help." Malcolm stepped back, his eyes cold. "You think this can be fixed? With what? A conversation? A therapist? This is betrayal, Elena. This is my son." Jacob looked down, fists trembling at his sides. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to," Malcolm whispered. "You destroyed everything." For a moment, none of them breathed. The house seemed to hold still, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what came next. Malcolm turned away again, shaking his head. "I need a moment." He walked toward the hallway drawer, the one where he kept spare keys, old envelopes, and beneath them, the small locked case he never touched unless absolutely necessary. His hand hovered over it. He didn't open it. Not yet. But the thought settled inside him like a storm forming. Behind him, Elena whispered, "Malcolm, what are you doing?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know if he could. But one question pulsed with terrifying clarity. When the next few minutes arrived, would he walk away? Or would he finally reach for the thing that could end this nightmare in a single pull? Malcolm stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the locked case as if it were breathing. The house behind him hummed with tense whispers, Elena pleading quietly, Jacob pacing like a trapped animal. Their voices blurred into one sound, a low tremor running through the walls, rattling something deep inside him. He opened the drawer slowly. His fingers brushed the cold metal edges of the case. He remembered the day he bought it, back when security meant protecting his home from strangers, not from the people living inside it. His thumb hovered over the keyhole, trembling. "Dad," Jacob said from behind him, voice cracking, "please don't do anything stupid." Malcolm closed his eyes. "Too late for that," he murmured. Elena stepped closer, her breath shaking. "Malcolm, listen to me. We can walk away from this. You don't have to." "Don't have to what?" he snapped, spinning around. "Respond to betrayal? Pretend I didn't walk into my own bedroom and see—" His voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't force the image out of his mind. Jacob lifted both hands slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Dad, I swear, it wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't planned. We were both messed up. We weren't thinking." "That makes it worse," Malcolm whispered. Elena's face twisted in agony. "I made a terrible mistake. I know that. But killing us won't fix anything." Malcolm laughed, soft, broken. "Fix? There is no fixing this. You tore our family apart with your own hands." Jacob stepped forward. "Hit me if you have to. Scream, hate me, but don't reach for that case." Malcolm's gaze flickered to him, then to Elena. The two people he loved most. The two people who shattered him in a way no courtroom, no criminal, no verdict ever could. He opened the case. Elena gasped. Jacob lurched forward, but Malcolm lifted a hand to stop him. He held the gun with a surprising steadiness, despite the storm ripping through him. His breath hitched as he looked between them, at their guilt, their fear, their trembling hands. "Back up," Malcolm said quietly. Jacob shook his head. "No. If you're going to do this, you're going to look at me. Look at what you're doing." Malcolm did. He saw not a man, but a child he once carried on his shoulders, a boy who clung to him during thunderstorms, a son he thought he knew. That memory twisted into the image of Jacob standing in his bedroom moments ago, lips too close to Elena's neck. His grip tightened. Elena moved first. "Malcolm, please." The first shot cracked through the house. Elena's body jerked as she stumbled backward, her hand reaching for the wall before collapsing onto the floor. A thin line of blood trickled across the tiles. Jacob screamed, rushing toward her. "No, Mom, no, no!" Malcolm's heart split open at the sound, but he couldn't stop. Couldn't unsee. Couldn't undo. Jacob turned toward him, eyes blazing with terror and rage. "What did you do?" Malcolm raised the gun again, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The second shot echoed. Jacob fell beside Elena, reaching for her even in his final breath. The gun slipped from Malcolm's hand. The house fell into a silence so hollow it felt like a grave. And as Malcolm stood over the bodies of his family, one question slowly formed. What would he tell the world when the police knocked on his door? And would any truth be enough to save whatever remained of him? The gunshot echo still rang in Malcolm's skull long after the house went silent. He stood motionless, staring at the bodies on the floor, the son he raised, the woman he once loved, both lying in a pool of red that spread slowly across the tiles. His breath came in shallow, fractured bursts. His legs trembled beneath him. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering against the floor with a metallic rattle that felt too loud for the quiet that followed. Malcolm stumbled backward until his back hit the wall. His knees gave out, and he slid down to the floor, covering his face with shaking hands. Everything inside him felt hollow, stripped, ruined. He had spent a lifetime controlling emotion, on the bench, in his marriage, in fatherhood. But tonight, every wall inside him broke. For several minutes, he could only hear the ticking clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound a reminder of seconds passing he could never undo. When he finally crawled forward, he reached Jacob first. The boy's hand was still outstretched toward Elena, fingers curled slightly, as if even death hadn't loosened his grip. Malcolm touched Jacob's shoulder with trembling fingers, then jerked back as if burned. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice raw. "I'm so sorry." He moved to Elena next. Her eyes were half open, as though caught between fear and disbelief. Malcolm closed them gently, his hand shaking against her cheek. He remembered the early years, her laugh, her warmth, her confidence. He remembered the vows. He remembered everything they once were, and everything they had become. He stood again, moving like an old man, and walked toward the staircase. Halfway up, he paused and looked at the framed photograph hanging on the wall. The three of them, smiling at a beach years ago. Jacob was young. Elena's hand rested on Malcolm's chest, all of them caught in sunlight that looked like another life entirely. He touched the edge of the frame, his fingers leaving faint smudges of blood on the glass. Reality crashed back when flashing blue lights appeared through the window. A neighbor must have heard the shots. Doors slammed outside, voices called out, heavy boots approached the porch. Malcolm's heartbeat steadied strangely, as if preparing for judgment. He descended the stairs one last time and walked toward the front door. He opened it before they could knock. Two officers froze. Malcolm stood in the doorway with blood smeared across his shirt cuffs, his hands raised slightly in surrender, his face pale and empty. "I killed them," he said softly. "They're inside." The officers rushed past him, guns drawn. One stayed behind, guiding Malcolm gently toward the steps. Malcolm sank down, staring at the gravel beneath his feet as more police cars rolled in. He didn't resist. He didn't speak further. He simply waited. As paramedics entered the home, one officer looked back at Malcolm with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Malcolm lowered his eyes. But as they placed cuffs around his wrists, one question echoed louder than any siren. What sentence could the world give him that would be harsher than the one he'd already passed on himself? The cell door closed behind Malcolm with a heavy clang that echoed down the stark, concrete hallway. He sat on the narrow cot, hands resting on his knees, staring at the chipped paint on the opposite wall. Days had passed since the shooting, yet everything still felt unreal, like he was trapped inside a nightmare where every moment replayed, whether he wanted it to or not. He tried to sleep, but each time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena collapsing, Jacob reaching for her, both of them slipping away. He saw the shock in their faces, the disbelief, the pain he caused. No jury, no courtroom, no sentence could compare to waking up with that image carved into his memory. Detectives questioned him again and again. They wanted details, motives, timelines. Malcolm gave them everything. No resistance, no excuses. He told the truth with a hollow calm that unsettled everyone in the room. "It wasn't rage," he said during one interview, voice barely above a whisper. "It was a fracture. Something broke inside me. I didn't think, I didn't see a way out." One of the detectives, a woman younger than Jacob, leaned forward. "Did you plan to kill yourself afterward?" Malcolm paused. "I didn't know what I planned. I only knew that something ended in me the moment I opened that door." Court arrived faster than he expected. The courtroom, a place he once controlled with authority and precision, now felt like a foreign landscape. He sat at the defendant's table in a suit that hung too loose on his frame, listening as attorneys described him with words he had once used for criminals he sentenced. Unstable, dangerous, morally collapsed. Families of past defendants came to watch. Some whispered that justice had finally reached the judge. Others watched in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the respected man they once knew with the one in shackles. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Malcolm didn't flinch. He only nodded once, as if acknowledging something he had already accepted long before the trial began. Back in his cell after sentencing, he received the few belongings he was allowed: a toothbrush, folded clothes, and a plain envelope. The envelope had no name, but he recognized Jacob's handwriting instantly. Inside was a photograph from years ago, the same beach picture that hung in the stairwell, Elena smiling into the sun. Jacob laughing as he threw sand at Malcolm's shoes. Malcolm standing between them, his arm around both. On the back, Jacob had written one sentence long ago, barely legible from faded ink. No matter what, we're always a family. Malcolm traced the words with a trembling finger. The weight of them crushed him in a way no courtroom ever could. He placed the photo on the small shelf above his bed, positioned so he could see it each time he looked up. That night, when the lights dimmed and the prison fell silent, Malcolm lay on the cot, staring at the picture. At what he destroyed, at what he failed to protect, at what he would spend the rest of his life remembering. No judge would ever pass a harsher judgment than the one echoing inside him. And he accepted it, because it was the only verdict he truly deserved.